So I just have to say I'm thrilled to be going after Ben & Jerry's because I think we'll piggyback nicely. But I'm Annalena, I'm a senior here at UVM, and I study food, if you couldn't tell. And this has been really wonderful for me because it exposes me to so many different topics, from international trade to climate science. There's such a plethora of things I get to explore. Now, when I first got interested in food, I was actually really discouraged. I was learning about things like air pollution, things like water degradation, and farmer debt. So it's really easy to feel powerless in these situations, and I was on the hunt for some good solutions. The predominant thing I kept hearing was vote with your dollars, which was so inspiring and empowering at first, because it got to feel like I was a tiny revolutionary every time I convinced my friends not to go to McDonald's. The crummy part about the solution is, of course, the fewer dollars you have, the fewer votes you actually get. So it sort of left me in a tight spot, and I developed this convoluted grocery store ritual of walking over to the organic produce aisle and kind of like kneeling in front of that fresh organic cauliflower and doing a silent prayer for all of my hypocrisy and just my tears streaming into the kale before eventually getting up, walking over to the instant ramen to buy that because I could afford it. So that wasn't great, and I was really relieved when I found the Real Food Challenge. So who's familiar with the Real Food Challenge? Some hands, but not all hands, so that's good. The Real Food Challenge is a nationwide movement to shift college and university food budgets into a just and sustainable food economy. And UVM has actually signed on to purchase 20% real by 2020. And guess who's leading the charge? It's not the people with the fattest wallets, but students. It was students who got the commitment signed. It's students who continue to design how it's implemented on campus, and it's students who are actually auditing UVM's food purchasing. So the coolest part about this to me is that UVM spends $8 million on food annually. So that's 8 million votes. As you can see, shifting just 20% of these $8 million is way more leverage than I would ever get just acting on my own in the grocery store crying over cauliflower. Now, before I go any further, I do want to stop for a second because I think some of you are probably wondering, does 20% real by 2020 mean that 80% of the food I'll be eating is fake food? The answer to that is no. But I get that the label real is a little bit confusing. And so I want to just emphasize that the Real Food Challenge in no way seeks to demonize or even do completely away with foods like instant ramen that don't necessarily stack up to a just and sustainable food system. But the data is important because it gets us back to why we eat food in the first place, for nourishment. Nourishment of our bodies, of course, but also nourishment of our communities and of our planet. And the big problem is that today, most of our food isn't doing those things. So here are just a couple of the problems that the Real Food Challenge seeks to solve. We know that pesticides are not only detrimental to the health of the pests that they're actually targeting, but can also have negative impacts on non-target animals, on the farmers that are growing the food, and even the end consumer. That's why ecologically sound is a critical component of the Real Food Challenge because it ensures that we're keeping our water and our soil healthy, and not to mention keeping pollutants out of our bodies. Next, we know that the animals that are giving us our milk, cheese, ice cream are suffering. They're being squeezed into tighter and tighter spaces and are now taking more antibiotics than people are. So humane is the second really essential part of the Real Food Challenge, to make sure that the animals are given the respect that they deserve. Now, of course, humans also deserve respect. And because of the way that the industrial food system is designed, it pinches the producers lowest on the food chain. So there's really serious human rights violations taking place on farms both near and far. So fair is the third category of the Real Food Challenge, to make sure that the people actually doing the work in the field are given a fair treatment. The last category has to do with the corporations that we are buying our food from that are really far away from our communities. places like California that are suffering from drought and water shortage. So lastly, we have local, to make sure that we're not only cutting down our food miles and making a closer connection with our food and the people who produce it, but also establishing resilient local economies. So even though food today isn't nourishing our bodies as well as it could, our communities, and definitely not the planet, these 4 categories of local, ecologically sound, fair, and humane are picked by student leaders to try and get us back to the reason we eat food in the first place. All right, so what does all this mean for UVM? Each year, we're seeing UVM dining services shift towards products that qualify as real food. Over the past 4 years, we've been able to switch to 100% fair trade coffee, 100% local apples as they're in season, and 100% organic sandwich bread across campus. And these are just a couple examples of the huge improvements that wouldn't have been possible without student research, student advocacy, and collaboration with staff, faculty, and dining services. And these are definitely incremental changes, right? But they really start to add up. We now spend annually $1.2 million on food that's just, food that's sustainable, food that's real. And the really cool part about this to me is that if we go back to that vote with your dollars concept that was so disempowering to the individual, it's obviously amplified by several zeros when we take it to the institutional scale. And if we take it to the national scale, all of the college and university food budgets added up total to about $5 billion annually. And so if every school in the nation were to switch just 20% and pledge just 20% of their annual food budget to real food, by 2020 there'd be $1 billion now going to support the real food economy. Bill Gates thinks that's pretty impressive. And we're getting there. So these are a list of schools that have already signed the commitment, and there's more and more adding each year. And there's actually hundreds of schools that are using the Real Food Challenge in some capacity, even if they haven't signed a commitment yet. So I guess if I've learned anything in college, it's that it's way more fun to spend other people's money rather than your own. I'm obviously kidding, we pay meal plans, so it's technically still our money. But I feel like the power that you can have as an individual is amplified so much when you're able to do work in collaboration with others. With the students that I've met here at UVM and across the country, I've been able to have such a greater impact than I would have if I had just continued to act as an individual at the grocery store. And the second really important lesson that I've learned from the Real Food Challenge is that the greatest power isn't always held at the top of the institutional hierarchy, but instead, in this case, is really held by students. And the Real Food Challenge is the story of these students who are able to see that what lies at the end of their fork has direct connections with what they study in the classroom, from climate science to animal rights policy. And importantly, it's the story of those same students who are holding their institutions accountable and leveraging their power strategically to create lasting change in the food system. Thanks.